सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
It's a rare week for Cut The Clutter that we are exploring issues relating to the same theme, or in this case, the same country, namely China, in a row. Usually, I have 5 shots at Cut The Clutter in a week, so I try and give you as much diversity as possible between domestic issues, international issues, issues in the neighborhood, issues that are foreign affairs, politics, judiciary, etc., strategic issues, science. In this case, because a lot of the world's attention is right now focused on China, and China is not doing anything to take that attention away, right? So we are focused on China. So once again, look at what we've talked about. On Monday, we talked about the rising anti-COVID curbs protests in China, which have now taken the shape of a kind of democracy protest. Now, they may or may not have gas to last a very long time, we will see, but this has been the first big challenge to Xi Jinping, so that's a big story. The second day, that was yesterday or Tuesday of the week, the Canadians released their own Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific outlook, and that is the same time that Rishi Sunak spoke out, and he said that the golden era of China-UK relations is over. So that became a key thing to talk about, again involving China. And what's happened today? Just to take away our other choices, because there was much else to talk about, the US Department of Defense, or the Pentagon, has released its annual report on Chinese military and security to the Congress. Now that is something that they have to do under the US law, and they put out a lot of data and a lot of detail there. So a report like that comes out, we can't not talk about it, even if it means having to talk about something related to China for 3 days running. So that's what we are seeing right now. Now, this is a 196-page report. And don't worry, I'm not going to summarize the entire report because that will take like a couple of hours, if not more. There are some highlights and some interesting things that I've picked up. And I've also tried to figure out what might be of greater interest to us in India, because as you would expect, a lot of the burden of this report and analysis is about Taiwan, is about South China Sea. It's about states or countries in China's neighborhood and what it means to them. Countries along, say, first island chain, second island chain, and so on. So I'm also distilling it down to what it means for India, which means China's Western Theater Command, etc., etc. Also, how Chinese doctrine and Chinese approach is evolving, and how much emphasis they are giving now to psychological warfare, to artificial intelligence, to basically taking control of their adversaries' minds, so they don't have to fight and win a war by using a lot of firepower. So that is the 21st century spin that Xi Jinping is putting on the old theory of winning without fighting, the Sun Tzu kind of theory, which is often quoted. So there is a lot of those nuggets. So I've got all these pages with me. Don't worry, I'm not going to repeat all of this for you. A lot of it is for my own understanding. It's like when a student prepares for an exam. Some people learn by rattoing everything, by cramming everything. Some people are such geniuses, so brilliant that they read everything once and it goes into their heads. Some people like me, who are a bit more bit more pedestrian, we tend to write things because that's our way of studying an issue. So I've got some things to talk about here. But before I get into the details, let me ask you a question. And I will wait for your feedback, for your responses. When Cut The Clutter started, which was almost 5 years back, Cut The Clutter now has gone way beyond 1100 episodes. I think today is 1122. Then I used to speak a lot more slowly with a lot of pauses. Now I know some of you liked it, a lot of you liked it, it seems, because a lot of you were watching it. But a lot of you also complained saying that this was too slow. And many of you said that, look, this is so slow that we watch it in 1.5x. So what I have done lately, as you may have noticed, is that I have actually speeded up. So if you think this is better, I'll carry on like this. If you think that I'm speeding up too fast and eating up words and all, then I'll again be quite happy to slow down. Maybe not slow down to the extent that I had slowed down earlier, but maybe slow down compared to what it is right now. So I'll wait for your inputs on that. Now, what is this document that the Pentagon or US Department of Defense has put out? You see the jacket, you see the front page. This is military and security developments involving the People's Republic of China 2022. And this is all the developments till the end of 2021. So this is quite updated. Now, what are the things that they are talking about? Now, there are sections on each one of China's commands, major theater commands. There are sections on each one of China's major forces, that is not just Army, Navy, Air Force, but also rocket forces, also special forces, logistics, things like that. But also theoretical understanding and also how Chinese doctrine and thought is developing. So first of all, how do you understand China's strategy, larger strategy? First of all, the document says, the Pentagon study says, remember what the Chinese talk about achieving by 2049. By 2049, they say they want the great rejuvenation of China. That's a good aspiration to have. But they also say that this will be done by promoting and building up on the foundation of socialism with Chinese characters. So everything has to happen with Chinese characters. Then again, the understanding is that the PRCs and PLAs and the Chinese military commissions. China is a unique state where the big boss, Xi Jinping in this case, heads everything. He's the boss of the party, so he's General Secretary of the party, Communist Party of China, Chinese Communist Party. He's also the President of China. He's also the Chairman of Central Military Commission. So China is a unique country also where the military is a wing of the party, of the ruling party. The military is not a wing of the constitutional government because the party is the government. So the military is run by the Central Military Commission, which is headed also by the president and also the boss of the party. Now, in their view, this assessment says, Pentagon assessment says, future conflicts will take place between large nations, but not just large nations, also between ideologies. That's very important. What that means is, now, when they say large nations, obviously, you're not counting India out. When you say ideologies, you might say that's only about America, but well, I mean, can you count India out? Because I would say that India and China also have conflicting ideologies of nation building, of governance, etc., etc. At least in our country, mercifully, and thank the founders of our nation for that, and thank those who wrote the constitution. The party, the ruling party, first of all, there can't be one ruling party in the country. And second, no ruling party in the country owns the army, as is the case in China. Then it goes on to say, the analysis goes on to say that the Chinese Communist Party in its 20th Party Congress, that is in October earlier this year, they had said that by 2027, which will be the centenary of PLA, the People's Liberation Army, certain objectives have to be achieved. That is, PLA by then has to become a very modern fighting force. And I will tell you this in some detail as we go ahead. Next, they have put emphasis on what is called as MCF, Military Civil Fusion, which means bring in dual use technology. So what is civil is also military, and and that all difference disappears. Tu na rahe, main na rahu, ek duje mein kho jaye. So mix military with civil in every areas, particularly technology, logistics, infrastructure, and harmonize that from the very beginning. So they talk about 6 interrelated efforts, right? Number one, fusing China's defense industrial base and its civilian technology and industrial base. So defense industrial base on one side, defense technical base on one side, and civilian technology and industrial base on the other side, then fuse the two. That's why I gave you that line, tu na rahe, main na rahu, ek duje mein kho jaye. Then integrate and leverage Chinese science and technology innovations across military and civil sectors. So everything that's civil is also military. The vice versa may not work. Everything that's military may not be civil, but everything that is civil is also military. Number three, cultivate talent in such a way that there is a blending of military and civil expertise in knowledge. Once again, merge civil into the military. One dovetails into the other. What comes first? Your guess is as good as mine. Next, build military requirements in civil infrastructure. Right? So when you're building a highway, see how the military would leverage it. Or plan a highway in such a way that it fulfills one of the military's needs. Now, every country does it. India is now planning to build this trans-border highway in Arunachal Pradesh. That will serve the needs of the military as well as civilian populations. So every country does it. In the case of China, this is all done institutionally, once again with Chinese characteristics. Next, you merge civilian logistics capabilities for military purposes, which means any fuel supply capabilities, any electricity supply capabilities, telecom, that's done for civil purposes, that's also merged with military purpose. It's available for military purpose. And next, very important, expanding and keeping and modernizing China's defense mobilization system to include all relevant aspects of its economy and society for use in competition and war. So mobilization in this case doesn't just mean a call up for reserve soldiers. It means mobilizing all national resources, and whether it's for war or for competition. And then it says that since 2021, the Chinese Defense Forces and the Chinese military planners, strategic planners, they've been talking about something called MDPW. Now, what is MDPW? MDPW is multi-domain precision warfare. And this is based on enhancing China's C4 ISR networks. No, I keep on telling you that armed forces, strategic communities love acronyms, right? So C4 ISR stands for Command, Control, Communication, Computing. That's the 4 C's. Then Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance. That is C4 ISR. So enhance your C4 ISR network, and this is quoting Chinese documents, but, and I quote, network information system of systems. What is C4 ISR, and how do you leverage C4 ISR and achieve MDPW, that is multi-domain precision warfare? You do it through networking information system of systems that incorporate advances in big data and artificial intelligence to rapidly identify key vulnerabilities in the adversary's operational systems. The Pentagon report says US operational systems, but I'm taking the liberty of saying adversaries' operational systems, and then combine joint forces across domains to launch precision strikes against these vulnerabilities, which means strike your adversary's nerve center, so your adversary loses the power to think, to decide, to mobilize, to fight back. Once again, decapitate your adversary without having to get into a firefight. Now the report, I told you it's 196 pages. It has subchapters, subsections on all of China's forces. So there's PLA Army, PLA-A, PLA Navy, PLA-N, that is plan. There is PLA Air Force, and each one has some highlights. The Army, for example, tells you that the Army is about 1 million strong, and you will see these charts run. When you see these charts run on 4 strengths, you will see the important thing for us to see is the Chinese strength for each one of these forces, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, rocket forces, etc., etc. Then in comparison, the US Department of Defense has used Taiwan, because that seems to them to be the most current and the most important military strategic issue right now, the more live issue. So that we can discount because that's not so relevant for us. But look at the numbers given for China. So if you look at PLA Army, it's more than 1 million active duty people. But again, the report goes on to say in detail that they've been actively reducing these personnel. They've been actively reducing these personnel. At the same time, they are increasing personnel in PLA Navy, the Air Force, and PLA rocket forces. So you can see that they are moving into more and more of the kind of warfare where they can use standoff weapons, where they don't have to put a lot of their soldiers in contact with the adversary, because that lead to casualties and that can have uncertain outcomes. And at the same time, getting so advanced with their artificial intelligence, psychological warfare, public opinion warfare, that they don't even have to use standoff weapons. So once again, look at PLA Navy. It is numerically the largest navy in the world, and it also tells you, the report also tells you, that China is now the fastest and the largest builder of military ships, that is naval ships, in the world, right? And they say that, look, today they have 340 vessels, of which 125 are major surface combatants. And last year it looks like the numbers might have gone down a little bit, but that's because 22 corvettes have been transferred to the Chinese Coast Guard. So they are with the Coast Guard, not with the Navy, but the Coast Guard is also part of the Chinese military. So they are all right there. And several major systems are under construction. PLA Air Force has about 1,900 fighter aircraft, right? 2,900 if you include all the trainers and some of the really obsolete ones. Of these, at least 800 now are fourth generation fighters. And the target is that in the next 4 years, almost all, if not all, then almost all, a very vast majority, will be fourth generation. The Chinese have already begun to deploy their fifth generation stealth fighter, that is the J-20. And other versions of J-20 are now in the works. And not just that, also H-6N, which is a new version, the latest version of the Chinese heavy bomber. H-6N has now been seen, which is China's first air-to-air refuelable bomber aircraft. So that gives the Chinese triad of nuclear deterrence a new strength and a new range altogether. At the same time, the Chinese are building 3 solid-fueled ICBM locations. You can see some of the charts will run from the report. You can see this chart. This is showing you China's ICBM locations. Don't be surprised if you find none of them is close to India. They are all in other parts of China. The Chinese don't need ICBMs for us because we are not that far from China. In any case, if those things matter, we are in the same continent. So these silo fields, you can see the pictures. In fact, there's another graphic that tells you also the firing stations or launch stations in a silo field. But note something very interesting. Even the Pentagon, which has used this picture, a satellite picture, has not used a picture from one of its own classified satellites. They've used this from Maxar, which is a commercial satellite. So they are being clever in this case. Then there is the strategic support force. That is a Chinese innovation. There, at every theater command, Chinese armed forces are divided in theater commands. Indian armed forces are trying theaterization for some time now, and you can see the debate that's going on. But at theater command level in China, there is an organization called Strategic Support Force, which centralizes strategic space, cyberspace, electronic, information warfare, communication, psychological warfare missions and capabilities for all the forces operating in a theater, that is Army, Navy, Air Force, etc., etc. Similarly, they have another innovation, which is Joint Logistics Support Force. So once again, Army doesn't need its own supply system, Air Force doesn't need its own, the Navy doesn't need its own. All of that has been integrated. Further, the report tells you the Chinese are leapfrogging into engine making domain. Earlier, they were dependent on Russian origin engines. And that's why JF-17s, which the Pakistanis are driving, Pakistani Air Force, most of those have been grounded most of the time. And many other countries who bought JF-17s now have them grounded. They are having deep trouble with the engines. One, because they're of Russian origin and Chinese have tinkered with them or re-engineered them. And second, now, spares are not available. So they are suffering. Chinese, on the other hand, are now developing engines of their own. So their new aircraft, including the J-20, are getting these domestic WS-10 engines. And similarly, for their new heavy transport aircraft, Y-20, they are developing their domestic engine. Now, China's border troubles. China has border issues with many countries. With many countries, they have land border issues, including India. With many other countries, they have marine borders or maritime border issues. That's almost everybody in China's neighborhood, right? The report notes that since 1988, the Chinese have been open to resolving some of these issues. So they've settled 11 of their border disputes with 6 neighbors, but at the same time, with sub-neighbors, they've ratcheted up these old disputes a lot more, as say with India and now with Bhutan as well, although that I think is a proxy for India. Again, the report has fascinating data. For example, there is a whole section of the new laws that Chinese have passed to protect themselves, to enhance their security. And these laws, it's as if no laws existed in China before this. National defense law, national security law, counter-terrorism law, national defense transportation law. That means you can then commandeer any transportation of any kind in case you need it for defense purposes. Cybersecurity law, intelligence law, which actually empowers their agencies to seize all kinds of things, seize and also eavesdrop on all kinds of people, anybody. Cryptography law, which means if you're writing your own cryptography, if you are doing anything encrypted, then you have to share it with the powers that be. So there is a cryptography law. Then there is a foreign sanctions law. What that means is if another country hits you with unilateral sanctions, you can then use a law to use counter sanctions against that country, data security law, etc., etc. Now, once again, if you make an in-depth reading of this document, it tells you the Chinese basically have three time-bound targets. One deadline is 2027. Second is 2035 and third is 2049. 2049, why? Because that will be 100 years of the founding of the People's Republic. Now, 2027 target for the armed forces, for PLA, is to accelerate the integrated development towards mechanization, informatization, intelligentization, while boosting the speed of modernization in military theories, personal weapons and equipment. Now, military theories and doctrine is a very important theme that runs through it. By 2035, PLA should comprehensively advance the modernization of military theory. Once again, military theory and organization structures and personnel. 2049, PLA should fully transform into world-class military, which means better than America's. At least that's the understanding of this paper. Now, what is the Chinese way of war? And what is the Pentagon's assessment of the Chinese way of war? So they say increasingly, the Chinese see a modern war not as a war of mechanized forces annihilating each other through firepower, but a war of opposing operational systems. If you see PLA writings, this paper says, this research says, Pentagon research, that if you see PLA writings, they talk a lot about systems destruction warfare. Systems destruction warfare is their guiding theory. Also, as we talk, let me tell you that this report has a lot of interesting data. If you are interested in such details, for example, you can see this chart. We are taking all these charts from the report. If you see this chart, this tells you the PLA's organizational structure and PLA's leadership. That's very interesting. So there are other graphics, again, which we take from this report. So this graphic shows you all the commands, basically theater commands of the PLA. It's interesting, and you can see that the one that's relevant to India is the Western Theater Command. That includes Tibet as its area of operation, all of the borders with India. It's also the largest command in the PLA right now. And you know what? These are graphics from a US Department of Defense documents. The borders of India are not authentic from our point of view, and we are trying to smudge them wherever possible. But once again, I want to say it by way of clarity that these are just notional and representational, and they do not respect the true frontiers, boundaries of India. So you can see this graphic, which gives you all the Chinese commands. Then you can see also this other graphic, the next graphic, which tells you all the Chinese Navy theater commands, all the Chinese Navy headquarters. Again, very interesting. Again, you see this chart, which gives you the details on nuclear ballistic missiles. Then you have conventional ballistic missiles, and then something that I had mentioned earlier, that is solid propellant, ICBM silos. Now, the command that's relevant to us, Western Theater Command, this gives you the names of all the generals who are leading these commands. Let me not read out these names for you. You have them all on my screen from the report. It's a screenshot from the report, so you can see there. You want these details, freeze it, and in any case, I will share a link of the report with you. But the interesting thing is, look at the Chinese structure. They have one general leading a theater command, full general. At the same time, they have another officer in exactly the same rank, full general's rank, who's also political commissar of the command. So every command has an operational general and also a political commissar. So once again, to remind you that this is an army owned by the party. And at this point, the same guy owns everything, the party, the military, and the government. Now, a new thing that's come out, the report tells you, in the Chinese literature, in Chinese strategic debate and research, is something called CDO. That is Cognitive Domain Ops. Cognitive, the magme. Cognitive Domain Ops. What that means is that you combine public opinion plus psychological warfare plus artificial intelligence and new technologies, once again, to get into the enemy's mind and close the enemy's mind. So CDO in the Chinese definition integrates military, political, economic, public opinion, psychological, legal, theory, and any other means that affect the target's cognition and decision-making behavior. And this leads to what the Chinese call mind dominance. So that's where the debate in the PLA and the Chinese military and strategic community is right now. And that they believe, and that is what this Pentagon report says, Pentagon analysis says, the Chinese believe, according to this Pentagon assessment, that this is better. This mind dominance is better than destruction by any firepower. And this CDO it is, which is Cognitive Domain Operations, which gives the Chinese an asymmetric capability vis-a-vis all their adversaries. And artificial intelligence and big data are the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and firepower, and missiles, and bombs, and rockets that arms this new strategy. So remember this word, you've heard it today, CDO, which is Cognitive Domain Operations, and also mind dominance. So you know where the Chinese are headed, and that's the reason all of China's adversaries and all of the countries which are affected by the rise of China, this not very peaceful rise of China, they should understand these things very, very well. And that's why this document is so important that we decided, reluctantly to begin with, to do a third episode of Cut The Clutter running on a theme linked to China.